Welcome to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25 Media. We feature top founders, executives, and business leaders from all over the world.
All right, John Corcoran here. I am one of the co-hosts of this show, and I want to welcome you all here. Of course, if you haven't checked out any of our archives, check them out because we've got all kinds of great past interviews of smart business leaders, marketers, founders, entrepreneurs, from companies ranging from Netflix to Kinko's YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, and you name it. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You can learn about what we do at rise25.com. And I'm really excited about today's guest because, you know, as you know, I'm a recovering attorney, practiced law for a bunch of years, and I know how difficult they can be to work with, attorneys.
No comment.
No comment whatsoever. And our guest is Roy Sexton. He's a content expert, marketing expert, and president of the Legal Marketing Association. So talk about a tough job, not easy. He leads marketing, branding, and communications efforts for Clark Hill, which is a 650 attorney, top 200 law firm, been around for over 100 years or so, has gone through a bunch of acquisitions. So talk about a challenge in order to get that messaging out. So we're going to talk about all of those different topics. That's his formal bio. I didn't tell him I'm going to do this, but I also want to introduce him with his more informal bio, which is his Twitter bio, which I tracked down as well, which neglects to mention that he's also the published author of two other books, Real Roy Reviews, volumes 1 and 2. He's a big movie nut, so we're going to talk about that. But according to Twitter, he is the 2023 Legal Marketing Association International president, author, actor, strategist, writer, collector, comic book fan, movie nut, singer. And I like that bio a lot better than the formal one, Roy.
It's a more truthful one. Yes.
And if you're listening to this and not watching it on YouTube, which you should watch it on YouTube as well, you can see he's surrounded by a number of different Star Wars
crap. My house is full of crap. Yes.
big Star Wars fan. But Roy, let's start with, first of all, the practice of law tends to be a rather staid profession. It tends to be crotchety, slow to change. And yet you're working.
You're saying these things. I am neither confirming nor denying. I like that I can pay my bills, so I don't want to offend anybody.
It's all out of my mouth, not out of your mouth. But, you know, it's an interesting role for you because being president of Legal Marketing Association and the role that you do with Clark Hill, you know, you are in many ways at the forefront of taking a industry that has been very slow to adopt new technologies. Law firms are some of the last businesses to even, you know, build websites and things like that. I know that because I've been in this industry for a long time. And so talk a little bit about your approach to all these things and how you take an industry that is slow to adopt technology and convince them to do podcasts and convince them to do digital marketing and convince them to run online video and all the different tools that, you know, businesses need to use in order to survive today.
I was born. No, I think, you know, when I go back to my background, you know, I'm an only child, grew up in the 70s, very quick to kind of entertain myself and stay interested in a lot of things, but also as such, I'm not as quick to adopt a lot of things as people might believe that I am. I'm somewhere in the middle of the pack. I was a late bloomer for sure through much of my youth and upbringing. I say that because I do sometimes, and I agree with your assessment. I do, and I know it was said with tongue in cheek. The legal industry is cautious about embracing new approaches, sometimes frustratingly so. But the benefit of that is you also get to see some things proven true or false. You know, I remember a year or so ago, everybody was going gung-ho about Clubhouse. Clubhouse is going to disrupt all social media. And I tried Clubhouse and I'm like, oh, this is dumb. What am I missing? I don't want to do this anymore. So sometimes being a bit slow out of the blocks is a benefit, but not being so slow that you miss out on the opportunity. So I think my personality is prone to introversion, is prone to introspection. I like film. We were talking about that as we were prepping. I like narrative. I like sort of consuming something and digesting and thinking about it. I think that skill set has served me well working with attorneys. I worked in healthcare before I switched to legal, and I traded doctors for lawyers. I'm not sure what guild I try next, but that's a whole nother podcast. But so I think I approach the conversation with attorneys in such a way that I'm not the typical marketer that's trying to upset everything off the bat, but I'm also opportunistic enough, and this might be the only child in me, to think about the opportunity and the pain point. And I would say uniquely for us, the pandemic, as awful as it has been and disruptive as it has been for people, provided a unique opportunity for some of us who are wired to say, let's lean into thought leadership, let's lean into digital marketing. It was all we had available for a good 18 months. And it did wipe the slate clean. And it also, attorneys are often quick. My mom used to say, I'm snapping my fingers to keep the elephants away. There are no elephants. It's working. Attorneys will come to you and say, I've been doing this symposium for 10 years and it's where I get my business. Really? Or I had an attorney tell me I send $15,000 worth of pies every Christmas and it keeps my clients happy. And I did say to her, if your clients are only hiring you because of the pies you send, I think we have a bigger problem. But I think there's a tendency to hang on to an activity that is a bit dated. Nobody asked you for. People really, they can buy their own pies.
For sure.
Go to their own football games. So when that wasn't available, I jumped right in there and said, well, we've got this thought leadership platform. We've got social media. And you take that moment and acculturate the folks who need a megaphone to something that's actually going to work better for them. And then you take those opportunities to show them how it's working. And when you get the proof point that a client came from it, or a call was logged, or just the numbers of views, because the other thing about attorneys is they want everybody to know who they are, but they're too shy to do it themselves. It's a weird dynamic. I want everyone to know I'm excellent at this. Well, have you told anybody? Oh no, I can't do that myself. So social media,
part of that is rooted, I think, in this convoluted history that the profession has with, for a long time, they couldn't do any form of advertising. Correct. And so they're very reluctant around that. Yeah.
And it was frowned upon. So, I know that's a very long-winded answer, probably not getting to the heart of your question, but what I heard in your question is, it is an industry that is not always prone to jump on the hottest new trend. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily bad for us.
Yeah, no, as you point out, like Clubhouse, there's a lot of people that put a ton of energy and resources and money into building up that channel. And then what good did it do them?
And if you want to be a successful marketer with whatever product you're selling, I learned this working with physicians. Physicians are, they're intellectual, they're data-driven. They are interested in taking risk based in data. So when you're a marketer working with doctors, you have to approach them with enough data that they know you have been looking at it, but not so much data they can't ever leave the room, but also that you are trying and experimenting with different things, much like they do with medications and treatments and things like that. Once I got to legal, that approach didn't work. I did a client satisfaction survey at my first firm, and I'm surprised I'm still standing, because I didn't check with the attorneys about the survey tool. I didn't tell them I was doing it. I just did it because that's how we would have done it in healthcare. And I came to them with the results, and nobody wanted to talk about the results, which were pretty innocuous. The clients didn't like the way we were answering the phone, or people were getting bounced around a phone tree. Nobody wanted to talk about solutions around that. They wanted to tell me I wrote the questions wrong. Who did I survey? Why did I send it? And I realized I had stepped in my first trap working in legal. Lawyers avoid risk. Doctors embrace a certain amount of risk. Once I realized that, I had to shift my approach as a marketer to say, don't worry, I'm not embracing crazy new ideas like client surveys. I am figuring out the risk first. I am just as nervous as you, attorney, but I will be your shield. I will be the one who goes out first with a message. And if it feels like it doesn't work, I'll be the first to pull that back. I'll be the first to figure out, as a platform right for us. I'll figure out all the challenges with it. And then we will go live, because God forbid someone should tease you at your bar association event that we're doing something different. And I often think, because this happens, we've done some things, and I hear, I was at a bar association event and so-and-so was teasing me that we were putting our pets. We did a campaign where we did four-legged coworkers on LinkedIn. And after it was all over, someone said, someone at the Bar Association was teasing one of our attorneys about that. And I said, good. That means we were doing something right. But
Got people's attention.
Yeah, but I digress a lot. Good luck editing or whatever you want to do with it after the fact. But you have to, as a marketer, understand that there is that tendency. Their job is to avoid risk. As a marketer, we are changing by psychology and behavior and trying to get people to make a purchasing decision. So some amount of risk is required, but you have to communicate to your attorneys that you're looking out on their best interest. And that frees you up to do a lot of things. And the other thing I advise people who are new to this space, don't screw up the easy stuff because they'll never trust you with the hard things. If they need a bio update, don't get precious about that and go, oh, I don't do that, or, oh, that's beneath me. Make the update, take care of it. Yeah. And that builds the credibility that you have to then later say, I have a challenging idea. I've done all this stuff you've asked of me. I've done it really well. I've earned my stripes. Now let me take on this harder challenge.
I have so many questions around this. So first of all, there's this weird thing with the lawyers where they want to take marketing advice from other lawyers. I've never really understood it. How do you overcome
competitors?
How do you overcome that?
This is a hard question to answer in a general way, because often the way my brain works, I have to look at the very specific example. And what I also love about lawyers is they'll say, I heard from a few people this. Well, can you tell me who said it and why? Oh, no, I can't tell you that. Well, until I know who said it and why, I can't really understand their motivation for why they gave you that feedback. So I often will use this propensity. I don't do jujitsu or karate or anything, but they would say use your opponent's movement to your advantage.
Yeah,
I know that attorneys are fiercely competitive. I know attorneys are very insecure about what other attorneys think of them, even their own competition. So I get there first. So if I am thinking of a new idea, I look and see, are other law firms doing it? Now, what I often will hear, weirdly enough, if you have a new idea, they want to know if other law firms are doing it, and they want to be first to be second. They're afraid to do something.
First to be second. That's great. Yeah.
So you have to mix and match a little bit. I also pull from other industries. If I know there's an industry that we are interested in being seen well by,
showing that they're doing it is a good
that they're doing it, show that they're adopting it. I mean, I don't get much of this anymore, but in my early days in this space, social media was anathema to so many of the attorneys. And I get that. They're afraid that there's content out there that later will be discoverable and be a problem, and they hear all these horrors. But to be absent from the conversation is a problem as well. So I also will use examples they have brought to me. I had an attorney that said at the height of the pandemic, I took people to breakfast every Tuesday. That was my marketing. What do I do? I said, well, go to LinkedIn. That's the breakfast that never ends.
Yeah.
And then they go, well, I don't have time for that. We have time to spend an hour and a half for breakfast every Tuesday.
Yeah.
Spend 5 minutes a day on LinkedIn and tell me the 10 people who matter to you and see what they're sharing. We live in an Orwellian age where everybody shares everything, the sandwich they ate at noon. And we do that because we want someone else to see us and comment on that. You have told me relationships are important to you. That's why you take people golfing. That's why you take people to breakfast. Here's another way to manage those relationships. And you can do it on your own time, on scale, in a manageable way. So
it's actually less time consuming.
Yeah. So, I don't know that I've ever been successful in talking the attorney out of, because when we're in a place of anxiety, any of us are for whatever reason, you can't shame the person out of that. Like, don't, it's like you come home from school and your friends are making fun of your shoes and your mom says, that's because they're jealous of you. I never believed that. You got to work that out for yourself. But if you can give the attorney something else around which to be proud and give them the context and the argument for why you're doing it the way you're doing it. And in those instances where you see another firm doing something doesn't work, highlight that for them and the why. It quite frankly is why I am so engaged in the Legal Marketing Association. I learned early that attorneys live and die by credentials. They live and die by how many bar association committees they're on and how many best lawyers accolades they received and that kind of thing. I, as their colleague, for lack of a better term, I have validity when I myself am engaged in my own community. Being president of the Legal Marketing Association, does that make me a better marketer than anybody else? Oh, for God's sake, no. I'm far behind what a lot of people are doing, and I know.
But you can slam it down on the table and win an argument with some of your partners, I guess.
But there's a pride in that for me, and there's a sense of authority. So I would say for people who are beginning this journey, get involved, and don't get involved because you have your cap set to be president necessarily, but chair a committee, put a program together, learn from your colleagues. You will be stronger as a result. You can bring articles in that are from your colleagues and say, so and so is doing this in another firm. And when, to back to your original question, when they look to another firm and they say, why are they doing that this way? Why aren't we? Which I think was baked into what you were saying. You might know the person who works at that firm, and you have authority to say, actually, I was, and attorneys do this all the time, right? I was at cocktails with Sally Struthers, who heads up marketing over there. Oh, wait, you know that person? Yeah. And I know what they're doing is this. What we're doing is this. Sometimes just having that inside baseball also gets you that sense of authority that you can really try things. But again, I go back to whatever you're doing, execute flawlessly. Don't mess up the easy stuff, and then communicate back after you. The other thing I've learned working in law firms is every law firm I've started, I've been in 3 different firms. I come in and they're like, oh, marketing isn't doing a thing. And there's actually a lot of stuff that's already going on. Just no one in marketing has collected it and sent it back to the attorneys in a digestible format that they like. And as corny as it sounds, no matter how big your organization is, put together a marketing digest that you send out every couple of weeks and say, here are the media hits we got. Here's what's went up on the website. Here are the alerts. It doesn't have to be the universe of everything. And after you do that for about a year, they'll go, my gosh, there's so much going on in marketing. And some of it's just repackaging and collecting all in one place, because attorneys, they think about their book of business. They think about their practice area. They never bother to look and see what else is happening in the organization. So you have to put that back in front of them to say, wow, I'm part of this larger enterprise. How exciting.
I'm curious. So legal marketing, it requires the involvement of the attorneys. Yeah. It's very difficult, I'm sure, for you to do your job without getting attorneys involved. And yet, as you mentioned earlier, one of the big objections is time.
Sure.
A lot of times they're billing by the hour. And so, getting their involvement can be challenging. Do you just say, okay, I will, whatever attorneys raise their hand or are willing to get involved, I will go with them? Is that what your approach is?
Yeah, I mean, I would be lousy selling Nike tennis shoes, because if someone said put together a marketing campaign that had a Gantt chart and what, I'd go, I have to be a little more reactionary than that, because that's how I've been working for 10, 15 years. We have a phrase we use often in legal marketing association, work with the willing. And it sounds, it's a little embarrassing to admit, and I might be the only one that admits this. Being a legal marketer is being opportunistically reactive. You have to have kind of a long game of where you're headed. The practices where there's market opportunity. You read the material, what industries are hot, but then you also have to assess, what's my inventory of actionable product? Who's going to play well? And now 4 or 5 years into Clark Hill, we've got a good churn because people know how to work with us. But in those early days, you got to work with the people who get it. And for me, I think that's why I lean really heavily on media relations, social media, digital. You can tell I'm not an events person. Some people really are, and they do a beautiful job with it. I think first off, understand your mix as a marketer and what you do well. Start there. And then start to find and meet your attorneys and collect them like you're collecting action figures. What do they like to do? Well, that one really likes to speak and present. That one likes to write. That one likes to be interviewed, and line them up, whether it's a grid you keep on your own and kind of plug them in against the areas that you're going to need people. And then opportunistically, they will either come to you and say, I've got something I want to write. I want to get it out the door. Can I work with you on that? Or work with a media relations team and say, I've got a pitch out there, find the attorney. And then over time, train those folks to say, I'm not going to bother you unnecessarily, but when I need you, I need you, and I need you quickly. And you're going to find the people that work well. And that's why that kind of weekly digest works in your favor too. So you start with 10, 12 attorneys that get it. And they're your go-to over and over and over. Yeah. And hopefully they line up with more, lucrative practice areas. But then you're going to put that digest out, and other attorneys are going to go, well, why am I not getting any of that? Oh, okay. I'd love to work with you. Here's what I need. Where do you like to kind of play? What part of the sandbox do you want to be in? And I think as you grow, then you're going to have the other problem. You're going to have the attorney that comes to you and wants to do everything. And that's almost a harder challenge than getting the one to kind of play in a media relations path or a podcasting path or a video path. The one that wants to do every single thing, wants to have an event, wants to have a podcast, and they want to do it all Tuesday. You have to. That's where I find is the hardest place to be as a legal marketer, because in this business model, everybody's my boss. If they're a partner in the firm, they all have a portion. They all kind of have that attitude, like you're Kinkos, you're in service to me. And if I have to say to them, I can't do all of that, they look at me like, well, can someone else down the street? Who are all these people running around? What do you mean you can't do all these things? And they don't really think about you as a shared resource. There are a lot of people in this organization leaning into me for support. Let's do the one or two things that are gonna make a difference for you. That's when I pull out the aspect of time, where I'm like, do you really want to be doing all these things?
Right. Like, for example, if it's like taking everyone to a ball game or something like that, the costs involved, the number of hours involved in putting it together.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me back to, I want to ask you about podcasts, because I started my podcast 13 years ago as part of my legal practice.
Amazing.
Yeah, I started interviewing my legal clients. I found it led to more legal clients, and I've been doing it ever since. But I mean, that was 13 years ago. And yet I still see to this day, there's lots of lawyers who have adopted podcasting, but there's plenty who still think it's an emerging medium, even though it's been around for quite some time. You've got a half dozen or so. We got one, the cannabis law podcast. You've got an immigration podcast.
Cannabis, labor and employment, immigration. I'm sure I'm forgetting one. Insure tech. And someone's going to be
leading in a lonely world.
That's our labor and employment with Vanessa Kelly.
Credit Eco to Go.
Joanne Needleman does our banking one. And again, this was a bit of we knew we needed a library of podcasts. And interestingly enough, when I started at Clark Hill, we had one attorney who's no longer with us. He's alive. He just left. He came with his own podcast and left with that podcast, and was a real difficult person to manage because he believed his podcast needed to be recorded in a soundproof booth in Chicago, and he needed a marketing person to sit there with him the whole time and push record and pop. And it was and I said, we need to do these, but we can't do them that way. And the blessing was his departure, quite frankly. And so I sat with the team and I said, do we have people that have expressed interest in this? And can we simplify this? And again, it happened to coincide I don't think the pandemic had quite begun. We had a couple that started before, and we did them very simply, much like you are. We got a lot of pushback on that because they'd heard advice from other people. I've got to buy special equipment. I've got to buy this. I've got to buy that. It's like externalizing. I'm only going to be a good golf player if I buy the most expensive clubs. And no, you don't need it. You need Zoom and a decent mic and a point of view. So we put our job aids together and we found the individuals, because it's tricky. And I was having this conversation with Nancy Merlin, who's presenting at our annual conference in April on this topic. And we were talking about, she said, well, I'll tell them what microphone to get and what headphones. I said, no, let's not do that. Let's talk about how you know what you're doing is successful. Anybody now can buy a book and find out what your microphone is. That's external. And then she goes, well, we need to find the attorney that will regularly record. I said, I'm not even sure that's the barrier to entry anymore. Yes, often that was just make sure you have an attorney that's going to do this like a metronome. Now I'm more interested in who's the attorney that has a strong perspective. That's why we have kind of unusual titles and graphics for our podcast. We want them to be a reflection of the individual, but still an outgrowth of our brand. So we figured out who are the individuals who have a strong point of view. Yes, are they going to be willing to record with regularity? But even if they're not, we can rerun the old episode. So let's not worry about that too much. And then let's talk to them. And I guess this is what you're doing. It's not just about, I've got a microphone and I'm going to tell the world my thoughts and everybody will come and hire me. Figure out other people out there that have their own big network that will help cross promote this podcast that you're in. And I would say, all of our podcast hosts to a one are really smart about that person has 45,000 followers on LinkedIn and they're interesting. And we're going to have an interesting conversation. And maybe 10 people will listen to it. Maybe 300 people will listen to it, but it will be out there. It will be an asset they feel good about. They may become a referral source either for business or other guests. They will create greater awareness of the firm and the individual. And to me, that's the more interesting conversation to have about the podcast. And again, We did a couple of these successfully. Joanne Needleman was our first, where we felt really good about it. And then I think Vanessa Kelly was next. And again, we promoted those back inside the organizations. We put a little money against them on LinkedIn. And then we had other people. Bob Hoban step forward. He actually came to us with a podcast and then started a new one. Robert Thomason came forward. We just had people going, well, I want to do that too. But now they're willing to follow the recipe you've already established for a couple of other people because you're demonstrating the results and the outcomes. And Joanne said to me after a year or two of that podcast, I hope she won't mind. She said, I'm almost too busy to do my podcast anymore. It's working so well. I don't have time to do this. I said, well, don't sweat. And she felt really guilty about that. I said, don't sweat it. Do fewer episodes, but don't stop.
Keep the momentum.
Keep it going.
Yeah.
Slow down. Because she was doing one a week for a while. And I was like, oh my God. But because you get that going too. We look like the Clark Hill is just the Joanne Needleman podcast. So you get them to slow down a little bit. And then you say, Joanne, you're sitting on 40 episodes. Are there ones that you want to rerun? Because we can repost those. But it takes some cycling through to get people.
Yeah.
But again, work with that personality first. And maybe it's, we both are film people and theater people. And that's my training is theater. So I look to cast for the part first, and I go, that person will work. And then we can frame everything else around them.
I want to ask you about that film connection, your interest in film and how that shows up in narrative. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about branding a 130-year-old firm that's been through multiple acquisitions. Yeah. You said you went through a rebranding a little while back. How do you hold, you have multiple different locations, some in other countries as well. How do you hold all of that? How do you determine one brand for such a large entity?
I think you can't be a control freak and do this kind of job and be mentally well. So if you're control freaky at all, and a lot of brand people are, I'm not. I'm colorblind. I can barely tell if we're using the same font half the time, and I'm bad at all of that, the stuff that matters to most people about brand. I will freely admit that. That's why I have a team around me that's like, Roy, it's Verdana, not, oh, okay. But I know it when I feel it and sense it. And for most people, brand that resonates is brand they experience. And again, I don't go back to legal for my energy around brand. I go back to Disney. I go back to Apple. I go back to Nike. I go back to organizations that I purchase a lot from. As you can see, Disney is probably half of this house. Is Disney the perfect company? No. Will people laugh? What kind of lessons do you take from Disney for legal marketing? Well, what I like about Disney is once Disney has encompassed something, we all now feel like Star Wars has always been Disney. It wasn't.
I know. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Marvel feels like it's always been part of Disney. It wasn't. And I think that's what we tried to do a little bit with our brand. We came up with the look and feel, and it was a clean European, very different. We had a very kind of traditional Harvard burgundy-ish color and a weird kind of avant-garde haunted house font. But when I started, and we went to a very clean font, black with a pop of green, kind of a deco effect, just like very sleek. So that alone, the look is going to be very clean and different. But now we have to fold the humanity into that. And my boss, I mean, I'm talking a lot like this is all me. We got a whole great team. My boss, Susan Ahern, is a genius. And she and our chief HR officer, just right before we were about to launch the brand, said, we need to bring our values into this. Clark Hill had been sitting on a great set of values. They'd never really communicated externally to the world. And that became the aha moment. So this clean, sleek brand. And part of that development of the brand, we knew we needed to bring people together. We brought in these Texas offices, and they still felt a little resentful that they were part of something else. And why do we leave them behind some of the great ideas they had once upon a time? And there were folks in California that felt a bit that way, and the East Coast. So through that brand development, the esoteric picking of colors and fonts and things, we had a lot of conversations with everybody. And we had surveys of all the attorneys, all the employees. What do you love about the portion of the organization in which you work? What do you treasure here? And we folded all of that together. So it wasn't just all Detroit or all Texas. So all that got baked into the language we were using. And then the values were just a natural aha. So we filmed this video 6 weeks right before we were going to launch the brand. And in the height of a pandemic all over the country, I'm like, how are we going to get this done? And we populated it with different voices that have been part of that brand process. And we just asked some questions about Why do you work here? Why do you do what you do? What do you love about your client service? Nothing groundbreaking, but we pulled it together. And then with this beautiful look, this clean new look that was fresh, but then human beings expressing who they were and what they were, that became the platform upon which we could fold in everybody else that came. So we've had other acquisitions since they've gone so much more smoothly because people want to be part of that. You can bring them in, just like Marvel just became part of the Disney empire and they started to populate those characters everywhere. And I think the pandemic, again, I wish we never had to live through this. It forced attorneys to work across geography in a way they'd never done before. They were very beholden to, I work in Birmingham, Michigan, or I work in Houston, Texas. Well, they had to really think about, oh, I don't know how to solve this problem, but there's an attorney at Clark Hill in Grand Rapids that does. And we also then launched industry teams in the last year and a half, right after the brand launch, because it was a great way to kind of capitalize on, we've created this moment of we're inclusive and everybody's seen and their stories are being told. Now collaborate. And our industries we support think about themselves as they might have a labor and employment issue, they might have an M&A issue, they might have an intellectual property issue. They want us to bring a team together that can solve for all of those things. Not, I go to this practice area and I go over here, And so we've been shifting the thinking to a more collaborative state. We already had a culture that wanted to be that way. They just needed the language, the imagery, the opportunity. And so I think now our brand, we continue to find ways to refine it and open it up. We're never done. I think this is the most important point I can make. And I'm sure this is such a ramble. You're like, God, why do I have this guy on?
No.
You're never finished branding.
Yeah.
That's the part that makes me nuts in legal, especially. Everyone's like, well, we launched our brand. No, so what? Nobody cares. Nobody's sitting around waiting for Clark Hill's new logo. They don't care. What they care about is, what does that Mickey Mouse emblem mean to me? What does the apple mean? What does it represent in terms of the experience I have with you? And that's the fun about branding. That's where I get excited. I don't care about fonts. I don't care about colors, but I realize the iconography triggers something for people.
Yeah.
What I want is, what stories do they associate with us? What kind of experience do they have when they're either a client or employed or, at a charity event with us, whatever? Do they get a sense of who we are as people? And do they like that? I think that's, to me, what we do well with our brand now. And we're finding different ways to tell those stories all the time. So
now I want to ask you also about narrative, and we chatted before and a little bit about movies. You grew up as a movie nut. You said your mom was a big movie nut. My father was a film critic when I was growing up, so literally every weekend we were going out to see so many movies. Yeah, it was definitely dinner table conversation, all that kind of stuff.
We just thought we were film critics in my house. You actually were in your house.
It literally was. Yeah, put food on the table. And So how does that show up in the work that you do now? How do you bring that kind of knowledge of narrative to this work?
I can't help myself. I need to come up with concise answers for every question you ask, but this is one that I could probably ramble on for days. I'm an English and theater major because my parents said, study what you like. And that's why they never had any money. And I spend too much money on theater props and things. I am very interested in the human condition and how we react to any kind of stimuli, particularly emotional. So when I've been in plays, for me, the most interesting moment is after you've been through the whole rehearsal and you have that first experience in front of an audience and you're figuring out what they react to and how the play you're in completely changes by the end of its run. Not taking away from what the director has created, because it needs to be locked in amber and, but it adjusts because the audience is that additional character you were missing in rehearsal, what they laugh at, what they cry at, what they react to. So that's in my DNA. I can't help myself. And I find it endlessly fascinating to see what people will react to. And I think that's why I enjoy social media so much. I don't actually have to talk to anybody because I am kind of an introvert, except under circumstances like this, and then you can't get me to shut up. But I am interested to see what people react to and what they don't. And sometimes when my body is telling me, oh, I don't know if I should post this. For example, my Legal Marketing Association presidency, our annual conference, everybody come, legalmarketing.org, end of April. We're in Florida. Now, as a gay man and a liberal, Florida is a difficult place for me to be. And I understand we've had people send us some nasty emails going, how dare you be in Florida? But as the LMA president, I know we've been planning this for 3 years and we have contracts, and there are people in Florida who will benefit from us being in Florida. And we are doing outreach to LGBTQ plus and people of color and different folks. And we're going to do the best we can to offset maybe challenges without overly politicizing. But last night I'd written a couple emails to people on the side. And I said to our CEO, should I post those online? And I thought, I don't think I should do this. I might be drawing attention to something. And she goes, yeah, why not? Well, 3,000 views later, 24 hours later, and 78 comments from people going, thank you for saying this. I was feeling this and wasn't sure how, I just was open about here's where we are. Here's what we're going to do. I know how people are feeling, but we're going to make the most of this. That's the kind of thing you wouldn't necessarily think you need to put out in the world because you're promoting the conference and the agenda and who's going to be there and the keynote. But sometimes taking that moment of humanity is exactly the thing everybody responds to. And I hope a bunch of people sign up to go to the conference because I put that out there. It's not part of our marketing message, but it got a reaction. So to your point about narrative, sometimes it's what is the audience reacting to and feeling? And there's a bit of a high wire act of going, what are they going to respond to? And sometimes when I think people are absolutely going to love this, it's crickets. And I find that interesting. And I think as a branding person and a marketing person, you are having an ongoing dialogue with consumers. You might know them, you might not, but that is a narrative. That is a play. That is a two-hander play. Now, film is different from theater because once it's locked, you don't know how the audience is going to respond. And if they hate it, unless you're Martin Scorsese, you never get another cut on that. But it's still interesting to me how the audience becomes part of the act of communication and the storytelling. And I think anything we do as marketers, if you're having fun with it and experimenting and you're in an organization where you're allowed to, like I am, you can have some wonderful discoveries. The old Reese's cup ads where the peanut butter fell in the chocolate and they were like, we found a new, there are times like that. We landed on a Q&A series, which we should have thought of at the beginning because we're all about featuring our people and their stories. But it came about because one attorney in a different part of the country, I think, was a little jealous that we had another attorney that was in a leadership role. And this person had been part of the organization long before. I don't want to sell too much because you know who I'm talking about. One of our execs said, we need to get some media for this person. And I'm like, they volunteered at that organization 20 years ago. What kind of media am I going to get? Right. But now it's on my plate to do something. If this person has a big book of business and feels jealous, basically. Yeah. So I turned to one of my colleagues. I said, could you just do a Q&A with them? And let's put it on the website and on social media. And if the media pick it up, great. Now, everyone kind of felt like that was a letdown until it went out. Because I was smart enough, this Tommy Franz is a colleague of mine. He's a journalist by training. He has done sports journalism and he's having fun with these. And he pulled such good stuff out of that. It's now become a continuing series that people look forward to on a monthly basis. It's just a Q&A, not that novel, but it's something that's a feature we're putting out. It makes somebody in the organization feel good, but they get to tell their story as a person, as a professional. So you got to sometimes lean into the moment and say, this is part of our ongoing story we're telling about Clark Hill and who we are. And, sometimes I think of myself as like an editor of a small town paper more than anything. It's like, what are the stories coming out of this organization that aren't just self-serving, but maybe ring that bell a little bit, but have some interest outside. Yeah. And express an expression of our humanity, which is really what people connect over is our shared humanity. Roy, this has been really great. Where can people go to learn more about you? And they're not going to want to. They've already tuned out 20 minutes ago. I'm prolific on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out my website. I haven't written a movie review really since the pandemic began. It's a lot of legal marketing stuff, but realroyreviews.com. Hopefully one day soon I'll start writing about movies again. Check out clarkhill.com to see kind of the work we're doing there, and go to legalmarketing.org. And if you're so inclined to go to Florida at the end of April, you can meet me in person at our conference. We'd love to see you there. And thank you, Roy, for just being yourself. So often I think in the legal profession, there can be a tendency to be a sanitized version of ourselves. And I don't know how to do that. I'm waiting for someone to bring up the hook and go, we've had enough of you. Thank you. I think that's probably why people connect with you, is because you are willing to do that. So thank you. And we look forward to checking out more work of what you do. Well, thanks for having me. And thanks for what you're doing. You have a wonderful voice in the market. And just someone who has established what podcasts can do over 13 years ago. I mean, you were a trailblazer. People were not doing this 13 years ago. And the fact that you've stuck with it and it's working for you, I think is a wonderful example that we as legal marketers should lean into, no matter what part of the cycle. If you're starting them in your firm or you're well into them, look at what John is doing and celebrate that. It'll be a great example, I think, for your attorneys.
I mean, 100%. I mean, it's brought such great joy and benefit to my life, from, my business partner to going to people's weddings who I connected with through podcasting. No joke, seriously. Yeah. So, just so many great relationships have come from it. So I tell people all the time, my company is a small part of the market, but I tell people all the time when I meet people, podcasting is such a blessing to your life.
I know you're wrapping us up, but may I ask you a question? Do you consider yourself introverted or extroverted?
Well, it's funny because I'm kind of more of an ambivert, because there's no way you can. I definitely get it. The classic definition is if you get energy from others, correct, then you're an extrovert, right? I do get energy from others. I don't need to go, withdraw to my room after being in a room full of people. But on the other hand, in order to get through 3 years of law school, as I did, and the bar exams, you got to have some introverted tendencies for long periods of time.
Well, and the reason I ask is I know that I do absolutely get energy by being by myself, not long, like 10, 20 minutes. I just need to be away. If I'm in a huge crowd of people, I just melt. One-on-one, I get a lot of energy from something like this. But what strikes me about your approach and why I finally found something that works for me is, if I have a job to do in a circumstance, if I'm at an event and I'm taking the pictures, or I'm interviewing somebody, or I'm speaking, I feel far more comfortable engaging with everybody. And I feel like this is where my point I'm driving to. When you have a podcast and you're in the driver's seat of that, it gives you this opportunity to have conversations with a lot of people over time and develop those relationships, because I'm honored to be asked. You've gotten to learn some things about me, and you have created that connection point. I feel that way a little about social media too. I had a cousin that's always like, are you friends with all these people? Do you know all of them in real life? I go, no, but some of the people I've developed relationships with online, which sounds a little creepy, have become people I have gone to weddings, and I have gotten to know them in real life. But it started because we had a mutual interest in comic books, or, somebody's friend of a friend. And I kind of had a spark and comments on something they posted, and I became friends with that person. And sometimes I've even forgotten later. The person will say, how do you know my friend so-and-so? And I'm like, I think through you. But I think this is another channel where, again, if you're developing relationships in a network, this is a great authentic way to do that. And if you feel self-conscious about that, this helps take away from some of that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I definitely think it's a great tool for people that feel a bit introverted, because it's not that hard. Look, everyone's done one-on-one over Zoom. It's not a big crowd of people or anything like that. So,
and people love talking about themselves. Sometimes they'll say, best conversation I had. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. I just asked you a couple questions and you never shut up. So which is probably how you're feeling today. Anyway, I know you wanted to wrap this up 5 minutes ago, but thank you. I wanted to ask you about that.
Great. Thanks, Roy.
Thanks for listening to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25. Visit rise25.com to check out more episodes of the show and to learn more about how you can start your own podcast.